On a freezing winter night in 1968, two siblings vanished from a quiet Wisconsin town without leaving a single trace behind. Their abandoned truck was later found buried deep in a snow-covered ravine, but the brother and sister were gone. No witnesses. No arrests. No answers. For 57 years, the mystery haunted investigators and terrified an entire community, until one forgotten piece of evidence hidden inside an old evidence box exposed a dark secret someone thought would stay buried forever. In the winter of 1968, the small farming town of Black Hollow, Wisconsin, was the kind of place where people still left their doors unlocked and everyone knew the sound of every passing truck on the highway. Snow covered the narrow streets in thick white layers, and the freezing wind pushed against the old wooden homes that lined the quiet neighborhoods. Nothing dangerous ever seemed to happen there. Families gathered for church every Sunday, children walked home from school without fear, and the local sheriff's office rarely handled anything more serious than broken fences or stolen livestock. But on the morning of December 14th, everything changed forever when two respected members of the community vanished without a trace. Their disappearance would become the most haunting mystery the town had ever seen, a case that would remain unsolved for 57 long years. Margaret Harlow, a 34-year-old school librarian, was known throughout Black Hollow for her kindness and calm personality. She spent most of her evenings organizing books for local children and helping elderly residents with community programs. Her younger brother, Thomas Harlow, worked at a nearby grain facility and often drove Margaret home after late events because the winter roads were dangerous after dark. On the evening they disappeared, the siblings attended a holiday fundraiser at the town recreation hall. Witnesses later recalled seeing them laughing near the parking lot shortly before 10 p.m. Snow had begun falling heavily by then, covering tire tracks almost as quickly as they appeared. Margaret and Thomas left together in Thomas's dark blue pickup truck and were expected home less than 15 minutes later. They never arrived. The next morning, concern spread rapidly across town when neither sibling answered phone calls or appeared at work. Their family contacted the sheriff's department, and within hours volunteers began searching the icy back roads surrounding Black Hollow. Farmers used tractors to clear snowbanks while deputies checked abandoned barns, frozen rivers, and wooded areas near the county line. The weather complicated everything. Strong winds erased footprints, and fresh snow buried any possible evidence beneath layers of ice. By sunset, the truck was still missing and there was no sign of either sibling. The peaceful town that once felt safe suddenly became filled with fear and uncertainty. Days turned into weeks as investigators struggled to find answers. Detectives interviewed dozens of residents, hoping someone had noticed suspicious activity near the recreation hall that night. Rumors quickly spread through Black Hollow. Some believed the siblings had slid off an isolated road during the snowstorm. Others feared they had encountered someone dangerous passing through town. Several witnesses claimed they saw unfamiliar headlights parked near the highway shortly before midnight, but the descriptions were inconsistent and impossible to verify. The sheriff's department followed every lead they could, yet nothing produced real evidence. Without security cameras, modern forensic technology, or reliable eyewitness accounts, the investigation slowly began losing momentum. Then, nearly 2 months after the disappearance, a shocking discovery changed the case completely. A local hunter searching near a frozen creek several miles outside town noticed a piece of metal sticking through the snow. Authorities arrived and uncovered Thomas Harlow's pickup truck buried deep inside a wooded ravine. The vehicle appeared heavily damaged, but investigators immediately realized something felt wrong. The driver's side door was open, yet there were no footprints nearby. Personal belongings remained inside the truck untouched, including Margaret's winter coat and Thomas's wallet. Most disturbing of all, neither sibling was anywhere near the scene. Detectives now feared this was no accident. The discovery transformed the disappearance into a full criminal investigation. State authorities joined the case and spent weeks examining the ravine for evidence. They recovered small traces of fabric caught on broken branches and found unusual marks in the snow suggesting another vehicle may have been present. But the freezing temperatures had destroyed most forensic possibilities. Every clue seemed incomplete, every answer just out of reach. Reporters from nearby cities began arriving in Black Hollow, broadcasting the mystery across Wisconsin. Families locked their doors earlier at night. Parents stopped letting children walk alone after sunset. Fear settled over the town like another layer of winter snow. As months passed, investigators identified several persons of interest, including a traveling salesman who had been seen near the recreation hall that evening and a former resident with a history of violent behavior. Yet none of the leads resulted in charges. Evidence remained too weak, witnesses changed their stories, and memories faded with time. Eventually the headlines disappeared, search parties stopped gathering, and the case entered the growing archives of unsolved crimes. But for the Harlow family, the nightmare never ended. Every holiday season reopened old wounds, and every phone call carried the painful hope that someone, somewhere, might finally reveal the truth about what happened on that cold December night in Wisconsin. For decades, the mystery remained frozen in time. Detectives retired, records collected dust, and younger residents grew up hearing whispers about the Black Hollow double cold case. Some believed the truth would never be uncovered. Others insisted the killer had lived among them all along, quietly hiding behind an ordinary life, while the town suffered unanswered grief year after year. No one could imagine that nearly 6 decades later, a forgotten piece of evidence and a determined new investigator would finally reopen the darkest chapter in Black Hollow's history. By the mid-1970s, the investigation into the disappearance of Margaret and Thomas Harlow had become one of Wisconsin's most frustrating unsolved mysteries. Boxes filled with witness interviews, photographs, handwritten notes, and faded maps crowded the evidence room of the Black Hollow Sheriff's Department. Every few years a new detective would reopen the files, convinced they might notice something previous investigators had missed, but the outcome was always the same. The case remained trapped in uncertainty. The town itself changed over time. Old farms were sold, businesses closed, and younger generations moved to larger cities. Yet despite the passing decades, people in Black Hollow still spoke quietly about the night the Harlow siblings vanished. Some residents refused to drive near the wooded ravine after dark, believing the isolated road carried a heavy sense of sadness that never disappeared. Margaret and Thomas's parents spent years searching for answers on their own. Margaret's mother, Eleanor Harlow, wrote letters to state officials requesting renewed investigations and organized annual candlelight gatherings every December to keep public attention on the case. Thomas's father traveled across neighboring counties following rumors that often led nowhere. False sightings became common. Occasionally someone would claim they remembered seeing an unfamiliar man at the fundraiser or hearing arguments in the parking lot that snowy evening. Detectives chased every possibility, but nothing ever connected strongly enough to identify a suspect. The lack of physical evidence haunted investigators the most. In 1968, forensic science was limited, and many items collected at the scene had deteriorated over time because proper long-term preservation methods were not widely available in smaller departments. During the early 1980s, one particular lead briefly reignited hope. A former truck mechanic named Daniel Mercer contacted authorities after hearing a radio program discussing the cold case. Mercer claimed that several weeks after the Harlow siblings disappeared, an anxious customer brought a damaged sedan into his repair shop late at night. According to Mercer, the man demanded quick repairs to the vehicle's front bumper and undercarriage, insisting he had struck a deer on an icy back road near Black Hollow. Mercer later became suspicious because traces of dark blue paint were found on the damaged metal, matching the color of Thomas Harlow's pickup truck. Detectives immediately reopened interviews and tracked down the former customer, a drifter who had lived briefly in Wisconsin during the late 1960s. Unfortunately, the investigation stalled once again. Records placing the man in the area were incomplete, and several key witnesses had either passed away or could no longer remember important details clearly. Without stronger evidence, prosecutors refused to move forward. The years continued passing. Black Hollow's old recreation hall, where the siblings were last seen, was eventually demolished after storm damage weakened the structure. New homes replaced empty lots, and modern roads cut through areas that once held untouched woods. Still, the Harlow case remained part of local memory. Teenagers dared each other to visit the ravine at night, while older residents warned them not to joke about tragedies they could not understand. Many believed the truth had been permanently lost because the people connected to the case were aging rapidly. By the late 1990s, most original investigators had retired, and several important witnesses had died. The case appeared destined to remain unsolved forever. But everything changed in 2007 when a newly promoted detective named Claire Donovan joined the Wisconsin State Investigative Division. Unlike many officers who viewed the Harlow case as impossible, Donovan became deeply interested after reviewing the original files. She noticed something unusual almost immediately. Although investigators had carefully documented the damaged pickup truck, they had focused heavily on the ravine itself and not enough on the route leading toward it. Donovan believed the truck may not have crashed accidentally at all. Instead, she suspected it had been deliberately moved there after the siblings disappeared somewhere else entirely. Donovan spent months re-examining old photographs, using modern digital enhancement technology unavailable decades earlier. One winter evening, while enlarging a grainy crime scene image from 1969, she spotted what appeared to be partial tire impressions several yards behind the recovered truck. Earlier investigators had dismissed the marks as snowmobile tracks, but Donovan disagreed. The spacing and tread pattern suggested a larger vehicle, possibly a heavy sedan manufactured during the late 1960s. This discovery reopened an important question: if another vehicle had been at the ravine, who was driving it? Determined to dig deeper, Donovan tracked down surviving witnesses from the original fundraiser. Many were elderly now, and some struggled to remember details clearly, but one retired waitress named Helen Bowers shared a memory that investigators had never properly explored. On the night Margaret and Thomas vanished, Helen recalled seeing Margaret speaking briefly with a man near the entrance of the recreation hall. She described him as calm, neatly dressed, and unfamiliar to the town. According to Helen, Margaret appeared uncomfortable during the conversation, though she tried not to show it publicly. The man left before the fundraiser ended and was later seen standing beside a dark-colored sedan parked across the street. Earlier detectives had recorded Helen's statement, but they considered it insignificant because she could not identify the man by name. Claire Donovan refused to dismiss the lead. She cross-referenced attendance records, archived vehicle registrations, and old employment files from nearby counties. After months of investigation, one name repeatedly surfaced: Richard Vale, a traveling insurance representative who frequently visited rural Wisconsin towns during the late 1960s. Vale had no violent criminal history, which explained why earlier investigators overlooked him, but Donovan uncovered troubling information hidden inside old police records from another state. Several women had previously reported feeling threatened by Vale during private meetings, though no charges were ever filed. More importantly, one archived traffic report placed Vale less than 20 miles from Black Hollow on the exact night Margaret and Thomas disappeared. The discovery shocked investigators. For the first time in decades, the cold case had a potentially credible suspect. Yet proving his involvement remained incredibly difficult. Richard Vale had died years earlier from natural causes, leaving behind no confession and very little personal history. Detectives needed evidence strong enough to finally explain what happened that winter night in 1968. Then, during a final review of forgotten storage boxes inside the sheriff's evidence archive, investigators uncovered something no one realized still existed: a sealed envelope containing fabric samples and unidentified hairs recovered from the abandoned pickup truck nearly 57 years earlier. That forgotten envelope would soon lead to the breakthrough capable of solving the mystery once and for all. The rediscovery of the sealed evidence envelope in 2025 marked the turning point investigators had waited nearly 6 decades to find. Inside were several carefully labeled items collected from Thomas Harlow's abandoned pickup truck shortly after it was recovered from the ravine in 1969. Among the contents were strands of hair trapped beneath the passenger seat, tiny fibers caught inside a damaged section of the truck door, and a cigarette package discovered near the rear tire. Earlier investigators had preserved the materials, but lacked the scientific tools needed to analyze them properly. Over the years, the envelope had been transferred between storage facilities so many times that most detectives assumed the contents had either been lost or destroyed. When Detective Claire Donovan opened it inside the State Forensic Laboratory, even veteran investigators reportedly fell silent, realizing the case suddenly had a chance to move forward again. Modern forensic specialists immediately began examining the evidence using advanced testing methods unavailable during the original investigation. The hair samples were tested repeatedly to eliminate contamination concerns, while technicians enhanced microscopic traces found on the truck's interior. Days later, the laboratory delivered the first major breakthrough in the history of the case. Investigators identified a complete biological profile belonging to an unknown male who was not Thomas Harlow. The profile did not match anyone previously investigated during the 1960s or 1970s. Claire Donovan quickly requested archived employment records, travel permits, and surviving family references connected to Richard Vale, the traveling insurance representative, who had recently become the primary suspect. After weeks of comparison work, forensic analysts confirmed something investigators never expected to hear after 57 years. The biological evidence recovered from the truck strongly matched Richard Vale's surviving family line. The announcement stunned Black Hollow and surrounding communities. Residents who had grown up hearing stories about the unsolved disappearance suddenly realized the mystery might finally be reaching its conclusion. News crews returned to the town for the first time in decades, filming outside the old sheriff's department and interviewing elderly residents who remembered the original search efforts during the brutal winter of 1968. Many spoke emotionally about Margaret and Thomas Harlow, describing them as kind, hard-working people whose disappearance had permanently changed the town's sense of safety. Some residents admitted they had stopped believing the case would ever be solved. Others confessed they spent years suspecting someone local may have known more than they admitted publicly. Detective Donovan, however, understood that identifying Richard Vale's connection to the truck was only part of the story. Investigators still needed to reconstruct what happened during the siblings' final hours. Working alongside forensic historians and criminal analysts, she rebuilt the timeline piece by piece. Evidence suggested that after leaving the fundraiser, Margaret and Thomas may have stopped briefly along County Route 14 after noticing another vehicle signaling behind them. Investigators believed Richard Vale likely approached them under the pretense of needing roadside assistance or directions during the snowstorm. Because the roads were isolated and weather conditions poor, Thomas may have exited the truck to help. Detectives theorized that a confrontation then occurred near the roadside, though the exact trigger remains unknown. Further examination of archived photographs revealed additional details previously overlooked for decades. Damage to Thomas's pickup truck appeared inconsistent with a simple weather-related crash. Instead, experts concluded the vehicle had likely been forced off the road intentionally before being relocated to the ravine at a later time. Investigators also discovered that one of the truck's headlights had been shattered from the side rather than the front, supporting the theory of another vehicle making contact. Combined with Richard Vale's presence near Black Hollow that night, the evidence painted a far darker picture than authorities originally imagined in 1968. As investigators continued rebuilding the case, they uncovered another deeply disturbing detail hidden inside forgotten archives from a neighboring county. Months after Margaret and Thomas disappeared, another woman reported a frightening roadside encounter involving a man matching Richard Vale's description. According to the archived statement, the man attempted to convince her to enter his vehicle after claiming her tire appeared damaged. She refused and drove away safely, but investigators now viewed the incident as part of a larger behavioral pattern that earlier authorities failed to connect. Although no direct evidence linked Vale to additional violent crimes, the similarities strengthened the belief that Margaret and Thomas had encountered someone dangerous, who exploited isolated roads and harsh winter conditions to avoid detection. The final confirmation came during a private meeting between state investigators and the remaining Harlow family members. Detective Donovan carefully explained the forensic findings, reconstructed timeline, and evidence linking Richard Vale to the abandoned truck. Though prosecutors could never file charges against a deceased suspect, authorities officially declared the double cold case solved based on the totality of evidence. Family members reportedly sat in silence for several moments after hearing the conclusion. For nearly 60 years they had lived with uncertainty, unable to understand what happened to Margaret and Thomas on that freezing December night. Now, while the answers could never erase the pain, they finally had the truth investigators once believed impossible to uncover. The announcement spread nationwide, and the Black Hollow double cold case became one of the longest-running investigations in Wisconsin history ever solved through modern forensic advancements. Experts praised the determination of investigators, who refused to abandon the case despite decades of dead ends and fading memories. Detective Claire Donovan later stated that the breakthrough served as proof that time does not always erase justice. Even forgotten evidence sitting untouched inside old storage boxes can eventually reveal the truth when technology and persistence come together. Today, Black Hollow remains a quiet town surrounded by snowy farmland and winding back roads much like it was in 1968. But every December, residents gather near a memorial dedicated to Margaret and Thomas Harlow. Candles glow against the winter darkness, as families stand together remembering the siblings whose disappearance haunted the community for generations. For decades the mystery brought fear, rumors, and heartbreak to the town. Yet after 57 long years, the silence surrounding the case was finally broken, and the truth hidden beneath layers of snow, time, and forgotten evidence was at last brought into the light.